lots of people have good ideas. Lots of people have grand theories. Lots of people have their article on the grand plan that could decarbonize everything in 10 years, etc. What the world lacks is people who can make things happen. And like the longer I've been involved in politics, the less I value the cleverest boy in the room and his clever new plan. And the more I value the person who can just like get some people together in a room and make anything happen, anything, like making anything happen. Those people are rare, the doers and organizers and actors rather than the thinkers are rare and prized to me.
Welcome to Climate Papa. This is a show about climate change, technology, and parenthood.
Welcome to Climate Papa, the show about the intersection of climate change, parenthood, and technology. And I'm your host, Ben Idelson. I'm based in Seattle, and I invest in climate startups with my fund, Step Change. If you've been a consumer of thoughtful climate media, it is very likely you've come across David Roberts' work. He's been covering climate and energy since the mid-2000s, first at Grist, then Vox, and now at his own independent publication and podcast, the well-known Volts. He's been one of the sharpest voices over the last 20 years, weaving in his unique approach to understanding what's going on in the changing world of energy and climate, and giving his clear opinion and sharp words to how he thinks that change is going. We had the opportunity to record this live in downtown Seattle at the 9-0 Climate Innovation Hub, and had the pleasure of some great audience questions that are at the end. And just a reminder, if you enjoyed this show, please don't forget to subscribe or follow in your favorite podcast player. I'd also recommend you catch up on Coal Part 1 over on the Step Change show, where we do deep dives on the history of human progress. Part 2 on coal is in production as we speak and will be dropping soon. All right, with that, here's David.
David, it's an honor and privilege to have you here for the conversation. Before we dive into your career in climate and all of the things that you've done over the last 20 years professionally and on the internet, I would like to hear a little bit about the human behind the keyboard. Could you tell us a little bit about your life outside of Volts, your family, your kids, and maybe even more about your dogs?
Sure. Volts is definitely the most interesting part of me. My life outside of Volts is very boring.
Your dogs might listen to this, so.
Well, my dogs are exciting. I guess the short story is, went to college, didn't want to leave college, so then I went to grad school, didn't want to leave grad school, so I started on a PhD in philosophy in 1998. This was in Edmonton. Then I was tried to transfer to a better school. I didn't get in. I didn't want to stay in Edmonton, which at the time was extremely bleak and awful. And so I dropped out. Moved to Seattle with no job skills or job experience or anything to recommend me at all, really. And like started working low-level tech jobs. I worked customer service for Amazon for a while. Worked for IMDb back when they first started putting ads on their site. If you remember the old adless IMDb, I was a key figure in ruining that and putting ads all over it. Worked for Microsoft for a while. Moved to Seattle for a girl that exploded quickly. And then less than 6 months later, met my wife, who I married in 2001. And we have 2 kids, one of whom is a junior in college this year, my God. The other one is leaving for college in September, my God. That's very sad. And then we have 2 dogs and a cat. My older dog, Forrest, who we've had for 15 years, passed away earlier this year. But we have 2, Mabel and Abner, our 2 pit mixes. Abner is a psycho. Subscribers of Volts will know.
We'll know their faces.
He's an absolute psychotic, but very sweet and endearing. And yeah, he's young. He's a little over 1. Mabel's 5. Anakin, the cat, is 15 now. We bought Anakin and Obi-Wan. My wife got them when I was in DC at Barack Obama's 2008 inauguration.
Hopeful times.
Yeah, and Annie's still around. Yeah, that's it. Walk the dogs, do yoga, podcast. That's pretty much.
Ready for empty nesting, or is that
No.
no?
No.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
I was waiting, I always read these things like, oh, by the time they moved out, we were sick of them. Everybody was ready for them to go, blah, blah, blah. I kept waiting to
Not sick of them.
get sick of my kids. I'm still not sick of them. So I miss them. I miss them dearly. Yeah. So no, I'm not prepared for that at all, nor do I have any wisdom to impart on that. I don't feel like I'm dealing with it gracefully at all. So
Yeah, it's a big. Yeah. Well, before we get into climate, I mean, your PhD in philosophy
doesn't exist.
doesn't exist, but your
Masters in philosophy exists.
and your master's thesis exists.
Holy no. This is an ambush. This is like Jerry Springer.
And the internet exists that contains your master's thesis. So, in defense of ethical naturalism, 1998. I only printed the first 3 pages as a prop.
Thank you.
But I did
Everyone
skim.
thanks you.
I did skim the 153 pages and the conclusion, and used LLMs to help me understand a little bit. But
This is all very disorienting.
that was the hope.
AI reading my thesis. My God.
Are there any philosophy folks here? Does ethical naturalism mean anything? No. Okay, good. I wasn't alone. I am curious, because first of all, reading the thesis and conclusion, I'm like, oh, you've been a good writer for a very long time. First of all, this is very well written. The conclusion had some beautiful twists of words in there. So that echoes through. Curious, when you look back at that time, did that set in motion some of the foundations and principles through which you look at the world over the following 20 years? And if so, how do you think about that?
Well, yeah. I guess there's 2 ways to go with the question. One is the things that attracted me to philosophy, I am, in a sense, doing much more now than I would have had I become a professional academic philosopher. Because if you become a professional academic philosopher, you're writing a paper on this guy's interpretation of chapter 3 of that guy's interpretation of this other, it's just there's too many students, too few jobs. People can't just sort of have brilliant new ideas on command. So it's all just, very, very hyper specialized and technical at this point. So now, but what I wanted to do was I like thinking about systems. I like thinking about how systems hang together, and, I like thinking big picture terms and then sort of connecting it to the day to day. I'm doing that much more via a blog than I could have as a philosopher. But the skills, not necessarily sort of the content of philosophy, but just the skills you learn in a philosophy program, which is just how to argue, what is an argument, premises, conclusions, just the skill of how they taught you to diagram a sentence. And in middle school, it's a little similar to that. It's just diagramming an argument, just what are the pieces, and where are the weaknesses and what are the junctions. It's just good training. And especially, I don't think I appreciated how rare those skills and habits are outside in the regular world. So there's a reason that there's a bunch of journalists who are philosophy refugees. I mean, it's a weirdly common thing. As for the content, ethical naturalism, the whole thing is just how do you create an ethics without God or the supernatural or souls or foundations of being or any of these, any of this sort of imported quasi-religious metaphysics. If we're just biological creatures on a planet, what does it mean to be good? Why be good? All that kind of thing. And that's obviously still,
quite relevant.
Still quite relevant. And the other part of philosophy I was into is cognitive science, Daniel Dennett and all this sort of embodied cognition. I don't know if anybody follows all that stuff, but that also I think is always, it's helped me remember that when you think about reason and thinking, take it out of the abstract, think about embedded, embodied creatures doing it. And in a sense that I think that transfers quite neatly to politics. the more you're in politics, the more you realize that like you don't start with some abstract perfect system and then try to cram flawed individuals into it. You have to
Start at the individual.
start with the flawed individuals and do the best you can with individuals as they exist in the world. So yeah, I mean, there are connections. But more, it's just like, I like thinking and talking about ideas, and I don't think there's enough of that in sort of the public realm. And like public response has been such that I think a lot of people
desire that.
desire that. Yeah.
To the point about that public thinking, and I imagine most of the people here know David from Volts, but before Volts there was Vox. Before Vox there was Grist, and you were at Grist for over a decade. I went to the website. This is all last night. I just went down my rabbit holes.
Still going. So crazily, like one of the oldest.
It's amazing.
It was born in like 1999, and like what other media
Independent
media operations still going? It's bizarre that thing's longevity.
It's amazing. But if you go to David Roberts on Grist and you go to the author page, as I did, and you look at the bottom and it shows, how each page shows 4 to 5 articles, and it shows like 1, 2, 3, ... 1,601 pages of articles, meaning you published, I think, around 7,200 articles there.
Yeah, a lot of these were blog posts. I started, our blog, Gristmill, back when blogs were the sexy new thing, yeah.
Then you went on to Vox. Looks like those are slightly longer form, over 650 articles. And then you've been at Volts, I think, since late 2020, and have done a number of pieces and over 300 episodes of the podcast. So,
it's a lot.
How did you go from this 150-page beautiful thesis on ethical naturalism to prolific blog? And I didn't go into your Twitter account and Blue Sky and add that up. That's that's why as many
talk
words.
About the number of tweets. That's where it gets depressing. I had what is, in retrospect, incredibly fortunate and increasingly rare experience in journalism, which is like, everybody who's in or around journalism knows all the lamentations. All the daily newspapers are vanishing. It's just all the jobs are vanishing. Like there used to be kind of a ladder. You sort of like learn the ropes, cover your city council meetings, like work your way up before you become prominent. But now there are so few rungs on that ladder that like, you get these like 22-year-old college grads who are immediately on BuzzFeed. And like, what does a 22-year-old college grad have to write about but what it's like to be me? Yeah. My personal experience, just like whatever, like live a little, But like people don't have a chance to work their way up. So I was lucky in that I sort of snuck into Grist. I think I was like the 4th, 5th employees, something like that. I'll never forget when I was first hired, we had a woman named Sherry who one of her jobs was every morning she would come in at like 7 and take the static HTML homepage down,
upload
and upload a new static HTML homepage. So I started just as an editorial assistant. Like we had, again, like before it was cool, way back when, we had a daily news email, and that was sort of our signature thing. It's very funny. The headlines are funny and filled with puns, and sort of like the writing was very funny. And so that was a joy for me because I like, I like fun and funny and like puns. Like we used to we'd write the 5 blurbs. I would send the 5 blurbs to an editor and then to a fact checker and then rewrite them. And then we would come up with funny headlines. And then we would have like a meeting. There were like 3 of us every day would meet to like figure out the
writer's room,
the funniest possible headlines for these news blurbs. It was all so like luxuriously slow now in retrospect. It all looks so like, imagine having all that time to, So anyway, so I started on a news update email, which meant I was sort of like had an excuse to read all the news every day because I knew nothing going in. Like I had no environmental anything history and not even any.
Did something drive you to it because it was environmental, or just so happened to be a job that was available and you could have become like a financial reporter sitting here 20 years of
desperation, purely desperation for a job. Like I was stuck in these crappy tech jobs. I was going to like be a graphic designer. It was such a joke in retrospect. So I saw this, like it was literally the first time I ever went to Craigslist. First time I ever found out about Craigslist. Literally the first time I went to that site. It was just an ad and it just said editorial assistant at a publication, a journalistic publication. I was like, I'll do whatever. I wrote this long overwrought 2-page cover letter to Lisa, who was working there, who hired me, who worked with me there for 10 years and now works for Canary and still edits me to this day. Bless her. She read my cover letter and she's like, oh, there's no grammatical errors in the cover letter, which turns out to be incredibly rare, even for journalism applications. I can attest, having seen a bunch of them now. So I knew nothing. So I got to read the news. I got to just write blurbs. And then I got to start with I started our blog, and Grist was small and obscure. So I just sort of I was raised by wolves. I didn't really have any mentorship or any help. So I was completely self-taught everything, but I got to do that in obscurity, over time. I got to sort of develop my skills and learn without being kind of in a big spotlight, which is rare now, to be able to make a living in journalism and not. So I slowly built up my knowledge over time. And what I discovered, to get back to the philosophy thing, is because Grist was just environmental at first, and it was sort of climate change that I honed in on, because climate change, especially at the time, especially in the mid 2000s, climate change was not just a sort of environmental problem. It was a still is kind of a conceptual problem. People just don't know how to think about it. What kind of thing is it? You know what I mean? What kind of problem is it? We
don't have a parallel.
It's what they call a hyper object. You know what I mean? It's so big that it's literally, you don't know how to squeeze it in your brain. So there was a role for someone just doing sort of conceptual, intellectual spade work, just sort of talking through, how do we think about this thing? How do these pieces fit together? What kind of thing is it? So philosophy actually ended up being incredibly helpful, and there weren't a lot of people sort of approaching it. Just the final thing I'd say is what I think has been an incredible asset for me is that I didn't come to all this from the environmental movement. I did not come up through that. I did not imbibe and absorb all those.
What was that like at the time, if we could go back?
Culture, it's just well, there's a lot to say about the environmental movement now and then, but I didn't come in through love of nature or anything like that. And I didn't come in through this long history with sort of point source pollution problems as kind of the model in my head for what I'm doing. I was able to kind of approach it very much from the outside with no baggage, which I think was relatively rare at the time, because there were climate obsessives who talked to one another. And then at the time, mainstream media, the rest of the world didn't pay any attention at all. So always one of my goals in my career has been to build a bridge from these people, to explain to the larger world why this is not some unique environmental thing. It is economic. It's national security. It implicates your concerns. You don't have to put on Birkenstocks to care about this. It already affects.
They are very comfortable though, but
it already affects the things you care about, and trying to convince the people in the climate bubble, look outside your bubble, learn how politics works, learn what else other people care about, learn where climate, you know what I mean? Expand. So trying to build a bridge between these, and I don't know how much of it was me, but I feel now there's much more, you know what I mean? Climate's a little, not as much as one might like, but more integrated into sort of the larger political picture.
I mean, in a way, it sounds like those first couple of years at Grist, both of all, they set you on this path, but they also set the way in which you engage in the path that I feel resonates to, the last Volts episode you did. One thing that at least I find unique is the fact that your writing style and also, your conversational style is not that stilted, journalistic, objective, oh, this thing happened, as though there were no human actors. That feels like maybe a gift and a reason for success, or how do you think about that? Because by default, if you were doing the climate beat at the New York Times, you wouldn't have been able to write like that.
Yeah. Not having any training at all was a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in that I think that formal journalism training ill equips one to be in the actual world of journalism as it exists today, which I think is widely acknowledged now. But at the time, again, journalism was very set and old fashioned. And so, I never learned the inverted pyramid. I never learned the sort of voice of God, third party. I never learned this sort of like strained affectation of like lack of judgment. You know what I mean? Like,
lack of
who
opinion.
am I to say whether things are good or bad? You know, like, it's like a pile of poop with broken glass in it. Some say, others say, you know, like I never got trained in that, and it never occurred to me, like, why would you talk like that if you have to? You know what I mean? Like, who would spontaneously come to that weird, you know, always my approach, and this again is just like, it's just the way I wrote. Nobody told me otherwise. So I always just try to write like I talk. And like I wrote an article about Grist actually about my approach to writing. And the sort of analogy was like, I'm sitting in a bar with a friend, and it's like an intelligent, educated friend, but a friend who doesn't know about my things. And I'm telling my friend about my things. Yeah. And like, if you're telling your friend about your things in a bar, the number one guiding rule is don't be boring, right? Because your friend doesn't have to listen to you, right? There's no obligation for them to learn about your thing. There's no reason, you know what I mean? So immediately, like, vary your rhythm, throw some jokes in, whatever, just like throw a picture of a cute animal in, like it's just whatever to like break up the monotony of that journalistic, like fact thing, you know? So like if you're talking to a friend, be entertaining, make jokes, be a human being, like show that you care and why you care and what parts you care about and why you care about them. Like, don't pretend like you're some robot. Like, what draws people to a subject is not the sort of objective subject itself. It's like, is the person telling me about this engaged? Like, do they care? Are they fired up by it? And if you are fired up by it, you can talk about it in a way that's engaging, even if it's very technical, very wonky stuff, you know, like every editor I've ever had tried to rein it in, like make it shorter, less wonky. But every bit of feedback I've ever gotten from the audience is thank you for like doing it fully. Thank you for laying it all out. You know, like my goal is always like, if I'm going to cover X, like I want you to be able to read my article and feel like
you got it.
I get it. Like I get X, where it fits in, how it works. You know, like I'm not an expert, but like I get it. And so many news articles still today are just like, there's nothing false in them. Like that's sort of like how you make a good news story. Like you don't say anything false, but it's just like factoid. Like how do these things relate to one another? Like what
the middle.
What's the connection to one another? How do they connect to the audio? You know, it's just like, they're not telling you a narrative to situate all the facts, because that feels, I guess, to journalists like editorializing or whatever, but like people need narratives to make any sense of facts. So I just like wrote how felt instinctive, and nobody ever stopped me.
People seem to like it.
People seem to like it. Like, especially at the time, like climate journalism's gotten a lot better and a lot more fulsome. There's a lot more of it, a lot more people doing a lot of different things. But at the time, like it was science journalists writing science pieces in science journalism tone, which like always bored the pants off me. Like I never like cared about, not really a science guy, still to this day, don't care that much about the science of climate change. I don't write that much about climate change itself. Just like it's getting hotter, fossil fuels are doing it. I know what I need to know. Let's get on with it. Like, let's do this. You know what I mean? So like, if you're interested in science, sure, go dig in all you want. But what's relevant for public policy and for being an engaged human is just like, it's getting hotter. We know why. We got to switch that stuff up.
What drives you to kind of consistently stay on it? Because a lot of people might be like, okay, I did my 10 years of the problem and like, now I'm tired. I'm ready to move on. Like, what keeps you going intellectually looking at this?
Yeah,
this
it's
space?
funny. If you'd asked me in 2005, would you like to still be writing about climate change 20 years later?
Yeah.
I would have said, no, I'll go insane. But like, it has evolved. The nature of the problem, nature of what's going on, lots has evolved and changed. So like, I've told this story a bunch of times, but like, I feel like for the first, call it 10 years, I was covering climate, 2005 to 15, something like that. Solutions were just theoretical mostly. Like there weren't solutions, like solar and wind were wildly expensive and
You couldn't turn off the coal plant.
far out. You couldn't turn off the coal plant. So just like, biofuels, people kept going on and on about biofuels, but they never were amounting to anything. So really like, it was like you scream about the danger of climate change. And if you want to do something about it, you pick up a placard and march, right? Like you're at activists, but like, and that was pretty much it. And that's like a boring dynamic. Like, God bless the people who pick up placards and march, but like, they're not that interesting to me. Like that side of things is not that interesting to me intellectually. And like, yes, the problem's bad. We get it. We've said it, say it again. Like, it's the thing about climate change. If you're just going to write about climate change itself, like, you write about it. You're like, it's bad. Things are getting hotter. It's going to cause a bunch of ill effects. And then like the next day, you're like,
It's worse.
still bad. Still going to cause a lot of, it's like 0.001 degrees hotter today. Same basic situation as yesterday, and like again, like quickly you get sick of that and want to move on. But what's happened is like starting with sort of like Obama's aura, and then really ramping up, like 2015 and then especially like around 2020. And now we're fully in the S curve, but now it's like solutions are within reach. They're tangible. They're economic. People are doing it. And so now my topic is no longer climate change. My topic is here's a big, wealthy, developed, complicated economy. Every bit of that economy runs on fossil fuels. So it's a big puzzle. How do you take all those fossil fuels out and achieve all those services without fossil fuels? And so it's a big puzzle, and you squint at it, any little bit of it, and it's a little puzzle, and you squint further at it, and there's a bunch of little puzzles in that puzzle. It's like nested fractal puzzles to solve. So like intellectually it's like bottomless. There's no end to the complexity and the extent of what it's going to take to find every bit of fossil fuels and do it without fossil fuels. Like there's just no end to the technical challenges, scientific challenges, political challenges, economic challenges, financing challenges, business models, like just name it. Like it encompasses every area of human activity. How could you ever
Get bored of that.
get sick of it? Yeah. Like there's no end to it. You know what I mean? So like every day now is like every little bit that solar power gets cheaper opens up a new area of things that you can do with cheap electricity. Like the cheaper it gets, the more things you can do with it. And so literally it's getting cheaper like day to day. And so every day there's new things you can do with clean electricity that you couldn't do before. And so it's been so fun. Like, like 5 years ago, I was like, electrify everything. And I was like, actually not everything. When, airplanes, industrial. And I've just, since then, 5 years go by and I'm like, it just did that you said it couldn't do. It just did that you said it couldn't do. Like the bowling pins are falling and it's like, what a fun thing to
that point. How do you choose what piece of the puzzle to at least spend some time on in a given week or twice in the week as your recent rates have been busy?
Some of it is just like personal preference, stuff I'm personally interested in. And then I have my thoughts about which direction broadly we're going to go. And so, like I would say broadly in the war of electrons versus molecules, I think electrons are going to mostly win. So anybody who's figuring out new things to do with electrons,
you're excited.
I'm interested. Like tell me. And if somebody's like, I've figured out yet another Baroque way to dig something up and turn it into sustainable aviation fuel, I'm like, feels like it's going to, feels like that's going to die in a few years. I'm not going to get too into it. So, I might be wrong about those things, but basically I'm like, what is the broad theme is sort of electrification, right? And that like encompasses a bunch of different things, but like that's sort of what I'm interested in on the one hand. And then, that's the sort of technical side. And then there's the political side, like what to cover politically, which is, changed vertiginously several times throughout my career. But like the reason, if you heard my sort of mailbag on this, but like these days with the federal government off the board, basically, except as a malign force of destruction. Like, I don't want to become a chronicler
Yeah.
of degradation and destruction. There's plenty of other people out there who can do that on a day-to-day basis. I have my sanity to worry about. So my two big things right now are, these I think are both the two most substantively important things in climate, and helpfully two things where most of the action is not on the federal level. Most of the action is at the state and local level. One of that is the grid. We can talk about this more later if you want. Happy to go off on a rant about the grid, but like in my mind, it's insane that the grid is not at the heart of U.S.
Everything.
industrial policy,
Yeah.
economic policy, national security policy, foreign policy, like name it. Like the grid is the lodestone. It's everything. Everything goes through the grid. Everything depends on the grid. Everything. And it's handy now that like a bunch of companies
Care.
hauling giant sacks of money behind them suddenly want a lot of electricity really quick. It's definitely like, giving that whole area a lot more impetus. So grid on one hand. On the other hand, housing,
Yep.
urban land use,
Cities.
YIMBY, that whole nest of things, both on a climate basis, but like, to me, housing and urban land use is a nexus of like climate and like particulate pollution, justice, and just like, trying to think about how to summarize this without going off on yet another rant. But like, if I was going to start, I say this a lot, if I was going to start a political party in the U.S. today, the slogan would be, we can have nice things. Like, we have been sold scarcity
Yep.
by jerk-offs who are hoarding resources. We have plenty of resources. We could live nice lives. We could be happy. We could have nice things. We could have healthcare. We could have daycare.
Housing.
We could have tons of housing. We could have an abundance of clean
There you said it.
energy.
I was waiting for you to say it.
Yes, we could have nice things. And one of the nice things that we have is like, I think one of the reasons people are in this scarcity mode is that land use in the United States, 95% of it, call it, is just unpleasant. It's just unpleasant to be in it. Like it's just big, loud cars everywhere and people scuttling along the margins, hoping not to get hit and crushed, which they do constantly, all the time, more than in any other country in the world. It is possible to create human settlements that are nice, where like people are walking around and they're seeing each other, they're seeing their neighbors, they're walking their kids to school. Like, I went to Barcelona in 2015 and like became one of those, this is what my kids always say, I'm like one of those exchange students that goes abroad and then will never
Stop
talking about it. Like I can't, I'm literally.
You say Barcelona.
I'm not allowed to say the word Barcelona in my home anymore. But like one of the things I saw in Barcelona is like these little kid trains of like a teacher walking kids to school, like 20 kids laughing and frolicking and playing and just walking through the city to school. And I was like, imagine allowing a child out of your literal physical hold
Yeah.
in any part of any American city. You know what I mean? So like just that sense of like everyone's competing with everybody else for parking, for road space. It puts people in the mindset of scarcity. So I really think like just showing people that it's possible to construct a nice place to live where they can like, where things can be pleasant is a big part of changing American psyche and politics. So to me, like the land use, the urban land use, and plus, like I don't have to probably tell anybody in this room or you or anybody else that the housing crisis is like screwing up. It's screwing up everything. It literally is touching and screwing up everything, including politics. Like I don't think the Democratic Party has fully absorbed the fact that by refusing to build new housing in its centers of power, it is sending people away to red states. So we're literally losing seats in Congress. Like in the same, this is like Ezra Klein says this on his pod all the time. If we ran the election again, got the same votes in 2024 just because of like population shifts, we would lose. Kamala would lose, and she would lose even if she won most of the swing states.
Yeah.
So like blue areas are repelling people. And one of the strongest, most craziest correlations you find in social science, which it blows my mind how tight the correlation is that the denser an area is, the bluer it is. It is almost mechanical. It holds at the national level. It holds at the state level. It even holds within cities.
Yeah.
The denser parts of cities are bluer than the less dense parts. It's almost like, it's like a bizarre natural law we found. Like no one quite knows exactly why or which way the causation runs. But like, to me, like if I'm a Democrat and I'm wondering, how do I make new Democrats? Like,
Build up.
there it is. Like make more dense areas and you make more blue people. Like the tool is right there. Use it. You're doing the opposite. Blue Democrats are doing the opposite of that. They are uncreating Democrats. So
this gets on, you've kind of said the words, but I want to yank them out explicitly. Yesterday, the book Abundance by Ezra Klein came out for those of us that might be a fan or have feelings about it. I'm curious what yours are. And it came out yesterday. I don't know if you had a chance to book. I mean, you've been around the writing.
I know those guys. I know
you're a Vox.
I know the history of. I mean,
to what extent? I mean, it's not just abundance and isolation, but as we think about kind of the conversations we've had about growth versus degrowth, abundance versus scarcity, conservation versus permitting reform, just like what is your kind of threading of this as you've built in that part of the puzzle?
Yeah. I mean, one thing I would say right off the bat is that, like, I read, who was it? It might even have been a review of that book. Mm-hmm. Who was it? Somebody in the Atlantic the other day was talking about the history of the abundance movement and talked about how the abundance movement has sparked this YIMBY movement. Yeah. And of course, like, YIMBY's coming out of the woodwork, like, excuse me. Yeah. Like, I was doing this shit when Ezra Klein was in diapers, which, was not that long ago. The notion of, like, abundant housing is been around for a while now. But, like, I would just say that the broad philosophic thrust of it, I totally agree with. Growth, promise, looking forward, getting rid of that scarcity mindset, upon which I think a lot of the environmental movement is based and still clings to. That culture still clings. I'll say the good things about it first. I think philosophically it's right. I mean, factually, just mathematically, they're right. We got to build a lot of things very quickly if we want to decarbonize. I think it was unfortunate in retrospect that climate came into public consciousness via the environmental movement. It had this very specific model of like scarcity, and the way to stop point source pollution is to find the polluter
and stop them in text. Yeah.
So, but like, this is not like that. Like, you can stop every fossil fuel emitting source in the world, and then you're just in darkness. You have to
transition
substitute these things. You have to build substitutes. That's the problem. So, and as a political matter, like, this has been beaten into me through rough experience. Like, people don't like paying more for stuff. In fact, they hate it, and they like paying less for stuff. So in retrospect, like you're an average citizen, you know nothing about climate. The environmental movement shows up at your door and says, hey, we've got a brand new problem. And the cure is to make everything you do and buy more expensive. Let's do this. Let's do this. Hop on board, grab a placard, So that's disastrous. Like, just as in a perfect world, obviously a balance of carrots and sticks are the ideal sort of mix of policy, right? Like, it would be great to have some kind of carbon tax somewhere in the system, but just as a political economy matter, it's just true that, like, if you want to build support and momentum and a broad coalition, you need forward-looking optimism, promise of wealth and growth and, something to reach for. So I think it's on the right track. I have worries about how it's going to evolve, like the specific people involved, some of their proclivities, some of their, it's real easy to see how this could just become another excuse for Atlantic writers to bash the left, which, like, is their bread and butter, and they love it. And I'm sure there will be some of that, it'll just sort of curdle into, like, environmentalists are stupid and they're in the way and they're NIMBYs and we should crush all environmental laws. You know, you can see a lot of ways that like it could be absorbed by the status quo and subverted and misused and screwed up. But politically, as a way of waving the flag of sustainability and decarbonization, I think it is necessary and in some ways obvious and in some ways would have been nice to come sooner. But as I said, this is one of the things that has been enabled by renewable energy getting cheaper. Right. Like it enables new politics too.
I mean, it's interesting. We saw this with, I've gone off a little bit with you on the history of coal and like what we saw from going from wood to coal. It was purely economics driven or scarcity driven of wood as a fuel source. And then seeing, you know, while Trump in every term says we're going to bring back coal, more coal power plants closed in Trump's first administration than Obama's second, because the economics of coal versus at that time primarily methane gas. The same thing's going to happen here with solar. Now, carrots and sticks can nudge things faster, make things harder. But at the end of the day, I think it's like I'm heartened by where we are with solar and batteries and these technologies to say, hey, like you can try and hold back the physics for a few years with some policy, but you can't hold it back indefinitely because it's going to burst through, whether it's not in the US, maybe it'll happen in, you know, around the world, or it is, right? Pakistan's whole story of grid defection and just putting solar on your house and just going, right?
It feels good to be on the right side of history. It's nice, you know, and like history's moving our direction and like there's an inevitability to it. And we're futzing around with the speed and the equity of it, right? Are the dials we have our hands on. But like it is happening regardless. And as you say, like in the way I try to describe it in general terms, I've found this helps people, I think, who don't follow this area sort of cognize why this is happening. So I'll give you the short version, my version of the short version. So for fossil fuels, there are sort of two broad forces that determine the price of fossil fuels. On the one hand, you dig the easy stuff and then the next bit gets harder and the next bit gets harder. Like intrinsically, the more you pursue fossil fuels, the more challenging it becomes to reach them. And all things being equal, the price rises. Then you have this other force, technological change and development, which is pushing the price down as technology always does. So these two contrasting forces mean that fossil fuels cost on an inflation adjusted basis roughly today what they cost 100 years ago, 200 years ago. It's weird. Like these two forces basically balance out. And like, if you remember peak oil and all that stuff about running out of fossil fuels, it was always people sort of over-indexing on this first force and under-indexing on this second force. Like the technological innovation always is miraculous. You know, like we're really good at it and it always goes faster than people think. It achieves miracles people think they can't. So blah, blah, blah. So then you turn your gaze to wind and solar. This first force does not exist. They never get any more difficult to find. They are abundant and effectively endless and will be as long as we're on the planet. So there's no natural force pushing their price higher and higher. There's just this force. There's just technology, which is why they only go lower. They only go lower and lower and lower. That's all they've done since they were invented. Lower and lower and lower. That's all they're ever going to do is go lower. I mean, with fluctuations, with, you know, we can talk about land use. We can talk about all this. I mean, there are, right. This is an approximation, but like roughly we're just going to get better and better and better at harvesting them, which means they're just going to get cheaper and cheaper, which means over time they're going to win. Like it's just built in to the process that they're going to win and get cheaper and cheaper. And already we're seeing it. Like already solar is cheaper than anybody thought. And if you just like, this is another thing that I wish I could like convey to the general public. Like, you know, solar's on this learning curve. But he's listened to my pods on learning curves. We know that like learning curves for a given technology are like weirdly steady. Like, so like for a doubling of solar deployment, you get a very reliable X% drop in cost, right? And that's true every time it doubles, and it has been true since the 70s. So you get this line of cost going like this. And I'm sure everybody's seen the famous graph where coming off that line of costs are predictions about future costs from the EIA,
linear
IEA.
yeah.
They're all like, it's going to level out. It's going to level out. It's going to level out. Like, so on and on and on, like over decades, which has led many people to say, like, modelers, like, stop, fool me 12 times. But if you just drop this obsession with the idea that they're going to level out and just follow the line on its current trajectory and project 10 years forward from today, you are in a world of energy abundance. You are in a world of like trivially cheap, endlessly available energy, which is a fundamentally new state for our species to be in, like a fundamentally new state for any species to ever be a new state for life itself to be in. Like, it's a big deal.
To that point, I think was it 2013 or 2011 you wrote, or is humanity smarter than a protozoa? And I think 2013.
Yes.
So
I think about that all the time.
Which it gets this kind of growth, degrowth. Are we coming up against our petri dish of the planet?
Yeah.
Or not? How do you think about that now? I mean, when you wrote that piece, we were not so clearly at this point in solution.
Right. Well, just to frame it, this was based off an essay by Charles Mann, the great science writer Charles Mann. And his point was, as far as we know, any biological species, if you remove their competitors, follow a very predictable arc. They grow and grow on an exponential curve, hit some sort of limit, and then fall apart. Whether it's lions or protozoa, you know what I mean? So his point was, this seems like
what we're going to do.
A characteristic of life, right? A characteristic of what it is to be living. And so here we are, human beings have removed all our competitors and are growing exponentially. So if we are like all other life, there's a crash and a collapse coming. So the whole premise of the article is, are we smarter than a protozoa? Can we self-consciously know that that's coming and act collectively with foresight to avert it?
Right.
That is the question of our life. That's the question of our species. And so, like once solar panels, like we're still digging up the materials, but like once solar panel recycling gets really, really good, which is, it's happening fast enough, you can envision a closed loop. And then you're somewhere close to energy that is almost impactless.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
What then feeds into water that's impactless.
Very close to genuinely sustainable energy, which opens up not just like desalination, it opens up a greening steel and industry, but it opens up like geoengineering. It opens up like developing or bringing back species or bringing back biomes that we've lost. Like once you have effectively endless energy, all kinds of doors open to you and to the species. So it's sort of like, if any species is going to be smarter than a protozoa, like we've got all the tools, like we've got what we need.
It's interesting that his piece and yours, I think, framed it around, do we kind of notice that we're 80% full? I forget the Japanese term for it, right? And kind of like self-regulate. But actually what you're getting at is, I think, the way that history has tended to solve this kind of population cliff problem, which is, do we actually kind of innovate and invent our way out of that cliff, right? And that seems to be actually the story.
Like Elon Musk's whole thing is, Earth imposes a certain scarcity, which gives you that S curve. But if you just go to other planets, you just like lift, you lift the ceiling. And theoretically, through cheaper and cheaper, more abundant energy, more abundant land, more abundant planets, like you just raise the ceiling forever and never hit it. I think that's sort of like The Economist, right? Like you're just dematerializing, you're breaking the connection between growth and prosperity and human well-being and material throughput. If you can just break that,
there's more petri dishes to hop over to.
Yeah, break that almost completely.
Right.
Then, in theory, you could have infinite growth. But like, you can think of a lot of ways that could go wrong. Let's just
yeah.
let's just say.
if we zoom back and kind of the cycles that you've seen in climate tech and climate reporting, and you're here in this space in Seattle where we're trying to do climate innovation, we have a room full of people trying to work in the space. Some of them, myself included, have kind of come in over the last couple of years. What is your zoom out message about where we are and what do you hope that the room would take away?
Well, I mean, the great thing about how this whole area has evolved is like you have more choices than marching now, right? Like if you want to be involved in this, you can do so as an accountant. You can do so as like an engineer or an inventor, as business models. Like there's so much business model innovation needed. And I think what I've seen is like, this is just like humanity, like the older people who first got a hold of this are in a lot of senses trapped intellectually by the status quo. Mm-hmm. They're thinking, how do we take this existing system and tweak it to make it cleaner? I mean, of course, like the young people coming in are like, who told us we had to have that system? Like, why don't we just make a new one? Yeah. So there's lots of like the curve of the ingenuity and brain power and creativity and public spirit that's being applied to this problem is also hitting that S curve. Like the cavalry is arriving at long last and we're headed up that curve. So like, I just say to young people, whenever I talk to students, whenever I talk to young people of any kind, like, do you really want to go into finance and figure out a way to shave 0.001 seconds off a trade or whatever? Like, you know what I mean? You really want to go into a hedge fund? Like, look at this. Like here, this is the challenge of our time. You can make a real, like there's just like, because we've used cheap fossil fuels for so long and developed habits around them for so long, there are just lots of low-hanging fruit around still
that are major. Yeah.
So you can like come into this area and make a real genuine contribution to the future of the species. Like it's not like there are ideas all over the place. Like, you know what I mean? Like you don't have to be a physicist to come up with the idea of like putting rocks in a box and heating them up. Like it's just like nobody thought of it before because nobody needed to. That just wasn't a thing we needed to have. So like the ground is littered with low hanging fruit. It's never been a more exciting time to like, just like if I were like a young, bright kid, this is where I would go. And that's what I wish that like national leadership could say that a little bit more clearly,
I'll say Rondo's a great name, but I do like rocks in a box. I don't know. Like
the problem is there are like 12 rocks in a box.
Rocks in a box. Yeah. It's a category. The rocks in the box.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I think we have about a half hour for Q&A. So Vikram here has a mic for us. So please use that. You can line up here. While folks are lining up, I'll kick off with one that I got on the service formerly known as Twitter. Do you think utilities are capable of reacting and scaling over the next 20 years, or will we be increasingly rely on distributed and other commercial energy sources?
That is a little bit of a false binary, as anyone who has listened to my recent episode with Pierre Lafarge can attest. If you haven't heard the episode, Pierre Lafarge, his whole thing is, everybody's vexed because given the current utility model, distributed energy, much like energy efficiency, etc., just means we require less utility infrastructure, which means they spend less, which means they make less money. So they hate it. They hate all that stuff.
And then they decay, and then the outages.
And so everybody's vexed. Like, how do we get utilities out of the way to build this stuff? But Pierre Lafarge's idea is just like, well, why don't we just let them do it? Like, let them rate base it. Like, let them find where it's needed and send out RFPs for bulk distributed energy and like bulk this market up, like really make it, like doing it on a hobbyist individual consumer level in his mind is just like never going to work, never going to add up. You need big institutions that can see where it's needed and where it could be used in bulk. And he's like, we have those institutions and we have control over them. We have public utility commissions that can literally tell them to do it. He's like, look around. Do you see any other institutions in better shape? Like, do you see any other institutions that are more trusted? Like, utilities are not in great shape, but like, compared to what? So like, TBD, I guess I would say on that question. It's very much a live and interesting question, the role of utilities.
I'm Holly.
Hi, Holly.
This question is also grid related, and I'm still figuring out how to phrase it, but generally you've touched on a handful of these things. with the grid is very much a technological system, but it's also an economic and political system. And it's enormous, right? This is the foundation of our economy, as you have mentioned. So it strikes me that it has the potential, if rebuilt and redesigned in a more distributive way, to also distribute not just energy, but like political power and wealth. And you opened this talking about this like hoarding being a problem. We have the opportunity for this distribution of lots of things. So I'm wondering like how you see, if you kind of agree with that framework and like how you see that manifesting, say like wild success 10 or 15 years from now.
Fantastic question. And yes, distributed energy distributes political power and social power and economic power, and is on the side of the angels for that reason, among others. Like you can make a purely technical case for it, but it also, I think, is part of a larger effort to sort of redistribute power to a local level. So, like anybody's listened to like my episode with Lorenzo Christoph, he talks about a new kind of grid architecture, a bottom up grid. So his thing is, just like we have transmission grid regional grid operators, his whole thing is we should do what they do in the UK now, which is have distribution level analogs, distribution system operators. Because his whole thing is like, what you want at the local level is for energy planning to be integrated with transmission planning and housing planning and economic planning at the local level, so that all these things work together. You want as much energy generated and stored and shared at the local level as you can. And so then, there will be communities that cannot reach self-sufficiency and thus need electricity from the transmission grid. But that should be the last resort, not the first resort, right? Like you start with self-sufficiency and work up from there. And so this will give every community the ability to design a grid that works for its community's priorities and needs and economic needs and social needs, and gives self-sufficiency. Energy self-sufficiency is political self-sufficiency in a lot of ways, or translates to a lot more physical power or physical autonomy. This is true not only for like, developing countries getting off imported coal onto domestic solar and wind. That's going to have huge geopolitical effects. The same basic dynamic is true for any little area of the U.S. Like to the extent it can generate and manage its own energy, it is healthier and more self-sufficient and more resilient against both physical weather and political weather, if you know what I mean, like more resilient against the rise and fall of politics. So yes, I think distributed energy and distributed power generally should be thought of as all kinds of power, and that's a good instinct. So yeah, like all these people who are working with models of local self-sufficiency, working to make local power work better, working to make local trading work better, all is on the side of the angels. I love all that work.
Great question.
Thank you guys for an awesome discussion so far. It's been really cool to watch.
And it's out again.
There you go. Let's use this.
Ironic that batteries are turning to be the
Yeah, interesting. Ooh, wow. Now I've got the power. My name is Skylar, by the way. I have an unanswerable question that I would just love your thoughts on. You had a very lovely description of the climate crisis as this large puzzle with, as you look closer, a bunch of kind of interlacing fractals. And I think everybody in this room is interested in finding which part of that puzzle they fall into. And as I talk with people, I feel as though most people fall into generally one of two camps, where they say, I have these skills. How does that skill apply? Or they take the high level look of saying, as I understand it, here is the kind of missing gap. And so I'm going to try to somehow find a way to contribute to that. And I'm wondering your thoughts on either how you personally, and you talked about this through your story, have thought about your own contributions to climate, but selfishly, and maybe also selfishly for other people in the room, how would you kind of advise someone else to think about navigating what could be an overwhelming or exciting or both collection of puzzles?
Yeah, that is unanswerable. I mean, like every individual has to make their own judgments. I imagine for any given individual, it'd be a balance of those. Like it depends on how devoted they are to their training in their career to date, like how early they are in their career, all this kind of thing. I would say that the opportunities are so numerous that almost any skill set, you can find a productive use for almost any skill set. You know what I mean? Like whatever it is you're trained to do, you can do it on the side of, on the side of decarbonization. You know what I mean? So I'm not sure that it's that stark of a choice in a lot of ways, but you know, if I were like in school or early, you know, I would be thinking like, where's the puck going? You know, in the old Gretzky quote, you know, like where are things going? And as I said, like, I think they're going in the direction of electricity, software, the intelligent management of electricity at the local level, and the integration of local electricity management with local land use, et cetera. Like those are my passions. Those are, I think, the big growth areas, but like, that's a huge landscape. Like that's an enormous landscape. You know what I mean? Like we need lots of planners. We need lots of software people. You know, we need people to keep the trains running on time. You know, like this really undervalued skill. Like I interview lots of companies and it's like the line between the ones that live and the ones that die are not the sort of brilliance of the founding conceit. It is the banal block and tackle of like executing a business plan. So just like, if you know how to manage a spreadsheet, just like go find some genius inventor who, you know, can't find his shoes and like manage the spreadsheet for him. You know what I mean? So like there's endless ways to get involved, I would say, no matter your skill set. Like find.
I also just want to add, there's this motion, I think, when I'm only 2.5 years into this after 20 plus years into this, but I think there's a motion of like what I call studying the globe or the almanac or the map. And then there's a difference between that and like traveling to go see cities. And so there's a bunch of great books, you know, Speed and Scale and Gates's book and others, and that give you, you know, a view of the whole puzzle at some altitude. And that's like, can be an interesting way to study what's going on over there in France and in Paris. And okay. But like, if you want to know what it's like to live there, you got to go stay in an Airbnb and walk the neighborhood. And I think there's value, especially early on, to kind of do this broad depth search thing to pop back up as you're kind of discovering what that is. And sometimes that leads to a scenario where you land in a position where you're always doing that, right? Like, I think that's kind of what this is like a version of twice a week, you get to go deep on something and pop back up.
Yeah. It's very fun. I don't get stuck in any of them. You know what I mean? It's like, I can learn and move on. It feels luxurious.
But then sometimes you get down there and you could have gotten, or one could go then and get stuck in a great place for them. And so I think letting yourself, giving time, especially in those first couple of years, to be exploratory.
I would add one other high level thing, which may or may not be particularly useful, but it's just been on my mind. So like one thing I've noticed is that lots of people have good ideas. Lots of people have grand theories. Lots of people have, you know, their article on the grand plan that could decarbonize everything in 10 years, et cetera. What the world lacks is people who can make things happen. And like the longer I've been involved in politics, the less I value the cleverest boy in the room and his clever new plan. And the more I value the person who can just like get some people together in a room and make anything happen, like making anything happen. Those people are rare. The doers and organizers and actors, rather than the thinkers, are rare and prized to me. Like that's what we need more of, is like just organizers. It's like if you can make one actual thing happen, that is more valuable to me than any number of tomes of genius, you know, political science or whatever. Just like, whatever it is, even if you are daunted by the big picture, just like find a little thing and make it happen. You're a friggin' superstar.
Shockingly cogent answer to an unanswerable.
This is really useful. Hi, David. I'm Samantha Weaver. I work in the DER and community solar space, but my question is actually about parenting advice. Since we're here with Climate Papa, we need to, I thought some Dr. Volt's words of wisdom would be nice. And my question is, could you just share a little bit about when you talk with your kids about the future, particularly in the current context of national politics, climate change threats, etc. Can you share a little bit about how you talk to them about the future?
Yeah, I guess I could. I've gotten this question a lot over the years, and I sort of think this is like a question that parents ask other parents. You know what I mean? And like, how many kids remember what their parents said to them about, like parents worry about this with one another, but like the kids aren't listening. They don't give a shit. You know what I mean? They don't remember. So like, you know what I mean? On the specifics, to me, the goal is make good people. That's what the world needs, good people. So like make good people who are like kind and generous and have some, are loved and secure enough to feel safe and content within themselves and don't feel this need to go out and fuck up life for everybody else out of some sense of incompleteness, which we see all around us. Like, to me, the problems of masculinity and maleness, etc., are all around us right now, and the world desperately needs good men, kind men who care about others and who don't view washing the dishes as some sort of like tyranny from the gatekeepers trying to suppress the founders. Who
the wokeness.
Like, I'm like, Mom, like that's what I hear when I hear tech founders is just like, Mom. So I just like, if you create good, create, what am I talking about? Like hope for the best, but like do what you can to make open-minded, curious, kind people. They'll absorb the world around them and they'll find good ways to engage with it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to be able to direct that process. I'm not going to be able to tell them, like, if I start talking about climate change to them, that's just going to, like, you know what I mean? That's going to end up in Barcelona. It's going to end up in the Barcelona box.
Did you have blah, blah, blah on your wall for a period?
Yes. If anybody's seen my Zoom background, there's a big poster that says blah, 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 which was my kid's present to me on Christmas a few years ago. Yeah.
My 7-year-old asked me, so what is working on climate change? You just talk to people?
Yes. Someone asked my younger son what I did for a living, and he's like, batteries, blah, blah, blah. So that, and I would just add on here because there's a little thing I wanted to say and I have not had an opportunity to say yet. And this seems like a good opportunity, which is one of my big worries right now is climate world is moving into tech and software in a big way for all the reasons that we all understand. And like, I look at the software world, I look at the tech world in the US and just like, I don't want that in my, you know what I mean? Like, there are lots of dysfunctions in that world that I would really, really, really prefer clean energy people avoid. And they are dysfunctions that I associate with like adolescent masculinity, basically, with like poorly developed men, I did this pod on enshittification and all this kind of stuff, like capturing people on platforms and extracting value from them the way tech did. And just like this sort of like dick swinging Mark Zuckerberg, like, break things, whatever, like, shut up, just like I want people to be good and responsible. And so this gets back to a previous question too. Like, if you go into software and tech in clean energy world, please try to make it a healthier, more productive, more pro-social environment than the larger tech world it comes from. That's part of what I try to do with my boys. You can't ever lecture them. It's all bank shots. You know what I mean? But I try to like talk to them about like, this man in the news clearly has a gaping void inside him that he can't fill. It clearly was not loved enough and now is out trying to make you miserable because he's not happy. Like, don't be like that. What a pathetic, weak man. Like,
be happy.
Strength is like being confident enough in yourself that you can be generous, that you can be outward oriented, that you can listen and care about other people. That's what requires strength and courage. This sort of like tantrum on the floor. I want all my toys and none of the responsibility. That's not manhood. That's not being a man. That's just being a fucking baby. So this is all far afield, but, just like, boy, the world needs better men.
I want to add, not in defense of the software industry, but I think a layer of nuance because I've
been a sweeping generalization, or two.
I see it as like incentives drive people do, and business models are the incentives around products. And so I think for people building businesses and business models and then products within those business models, thinking through what incentive alignment that ultimately creates. There's a big difference between a company that builds software to help people be more productive and they're writing and building a nice Microsoft Word writing tool versus a company that says, hey, I need your time and engagement and attention. They're just going to lead to different product decisions to optimize, the outcome of the company. So if you're building a new business, a new product, and you're thinking about the pricing of the product and how it's all going to work and what value it's going to provide, those are choices you get to make kind of at the founding of the thing that then set in motion, I believe, what will be, if it's successful, the downstream incentive structure around the system at play.
Leadership, leadership is so important. The final thing I'd say on this is if you care about this particular thing, being a good person and productively engaging, go back and listen to a pod I did with a guy, I can't remember his name, but he's making electric planes. I think his first name is Kyle. I don't remember his name, but all I remember is that he is deliberately not building his business in California or in Silicon Valley. I think he's up in like Maine or Vermont or somewhere. He's built this sort of complex. He's hired a diverse group of people. He has free daycare on site. He's flying electric planes, and instead of just like breaking things and then asking forgiveness later, like a cool dude does, he like went to county officials and was like worked proactively to get their trust, and so that everybody could win. And so everybody could like gain something. You know what I mean? It's just like, just talking to the guy, I was like, please replicate yourself. Like, please go to Silicon Valley and replicate yourself. Like, if you want a model of what like, and this is like literally one of the smartest human beings I've ever talked to. He's one of these people you talk to him for 5 minutes and you feel like you can like warm your hands on his brains, but like you can be smart and you can build things and you can be nice. There's no conflict between those things. So that pod, I think, is a good illustration.
Hi, I'm Steve. Thanks so much in general for your work on like making complicated stuff interesting and meaningful and bringing some hope. Like, we could not do stupid stuff. We could do smart stuff and be better off. That's a good story. I've been working more than 25 years connecting smart growth and climate change. We did this book, Growing Cooler, almost 20 years ago. And your recent podcast, appreciate you sort of just talking about how urban form is so critical for building energy use, for transportation, for embodied carbon. And you talk about how your kids talk about your work. My son, like, oh, dad, he does gentrification. Oh, thanks. But your point, a little bit, but your point about, all right, if we don't bring the equity side, the sort of social equity side, we're in trouble. We know we need the financial capital, but we need the social capital to connect with stuff that people care about. So one thing I want to throw out there, I know the statistics for Ontario. I don't know it for Washington. There's like 4 million empty bedrooms in Ontario where I run a foundation right now. Like, if we could fill some of those with people, like home share to help grandma reach the high shelf, put an ADU in the basement, add something on the property. And we need sort of capacity to help folks sort of do that, plan it, construct it, finance it, manage it, because there's all this underutilized property. We don't have to change how urban form works. Worst case, we're giving homeowners some more income. Hopefully that extra income is helping to a deeper retrofit. And maybe it's contributing to sort of solving housing, but this multi-solving is complicated. But if we don't, we kind of know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, this is complicated to answer how to solve the housing prices. But I mean, I think step one is the things you want, stop making them illegal. So like, there you go. Like, legalize the things you want. Seems easy enough, like, as a first step, but like, that sort of online meme of like, this sort of dense urbanism is illegal in most parts of America. It's like, that's true. Like, almost everything you want to happen is basically illegal almost everywhere. So like, let's not outthink ourselves. Let's just start by legalizing what we want to happen, and then, see how much it happens, and then we can like accelerate it. But like, just begin with. But I feel like we need, I think scarcity of housing is the problem, bigger in scale than any other problem in housing. So I just think that like there's nothing to be lost by just beating that drum over and over again. Like solve a lot of problems just by building more. Like look at, there's like point to Austin, like they just built more. And so all prices along the entire income scale of housing all come down when you build more. Like it's supply and demand exists. You know what I mean? So that's not a brilliant answer to your question, but like every locality, municipality should begin just by looking at its bylaws and looking at its standards and looking at its building standards and its road standards. It's just like, let's stop mandating crappy stuff. Like step one.
Hi, I'm Tyler. Big fan of the podcast, David. Thank you. Long time, first time, as they say. Volts does a lot of good connecting people and ideas in the climate space. At least for me personally, that's how it's worked. I'm curious if you have any plans for growth and further impact as your subscriber base grows. Should you be leading group trips to Barcelona?
Once my deep-pocketed patron shows up, got all kinds of ideas about taking people to Barcelona. This is an interesting point. Like, there's a reason I work alone. I'll just say, like every place I've ever worked, I've gotten the same performance review at the end of the year. Like at Grist, it became a running joke because it's the same thing every year. Like the work's great. If you could just like not be such a dick, so I don't know what reason of childhood trauma or whatever made me the way I am, but I'm just not a good employee. And I'm not a good employer, and I'm not a good colleague. So that just you subtract all those and you end up with where I am, which is just me. Like nobody has to be annoyed about my annoying habits but me. You know what I mean? Like I don't have to apologize for my procrastination or the sort of irrational, weird way I do things. I don't have to explain it to anybody. I don't have to work with anybody else. You know what I mean? So like, to me, that's just like Valhalla. Like people complain about working at home or working alone or working for themselves or whatever. And it's like, I love it every day. Like I've never had a second's hesitation. So this is the thing, like growth is one of these assumptions that like in the business world is like, I'll just say this, like if I could lock in the number of paid subscribers that I have today and trust that would be steady going forward, I'm fine where I am. I don't feel any need to grow. I don't have any grand growth plans. I don't want to build anything or hire anybody or do any more work. Like I don't even like working. Like I just like to me, the stuff I do, the whole point of launching Volts is like, what if I could just do the stuff I like and just not do the stuff I don't like? Like, let's run a test. Like, how long can I get away with just not doing any of the stuff I don't like? And it turns out like, you can get away with not doing any of the stuff you don't like. So like I've created a work situation for myself where 95% of my work is the work I like doing. And so any bringing in of partners or funders or advertisers or patrons or colleagues or employees, any of that just like increases the proportion of stuff I don't like thinking about or doing. So I'm just not gonna. I'm just gonna see if I can make this work. You know?
You have an employee though, right?
I got a guy who works for me 10 hours a week, mainly to handle customer service complaints, which is one of those things I don't like doing.
Okay, well, James Gordy, Bayou Energy. Hi, Ben. Hi, Dave. To ask it quickly, great that energy markets are pretty local, but also you've talked a lot about public utility commissions and the misaligned incentives of folks like utilities, right? Elephant in the room. You've talked to so many people. What's your like short list of things you think we can do to like accelerate the inevitability of techno-economics of clean energy and solar winning today?
the best thing we can do in the U.S. is just align utility incentives in the right direction. So two big things I would propose for utilities, and this is not a complete answer, and each of these requires a lot more explanation. But one is rates of return, right? The whole premise of the investor-owned utility is invest your money, you get a guaranteed rate of return. That makes it safe, that attracts capital, right? The regulatory compact is you're supposed to get the minimum rate of return necessary to attract the capital, right? Only and no more. And like rates of return in the utility sector have been bloating and bloating and bloating for 30 some years now. And there's just lots of like money being siphoned out of the system into shareholder pockets unnecessarily. That could, if you cut that incentive, and that gives utilities incentive, even more incentive to spend to get money back. So cut rates of return substantially, number one, and allow utilities to build distributed energy, to determine where it's needed, to put out an RFP for what kind they want. You know, people can still bring their own if they want. They can still buy their own if they want. And this is still going to be a market for it. There's going to be private developers that build it, but like let the utility put its knowledge and perspective to use rather than fighting it, building it. And I think those two things alone would put the thrusters on.
Aditya, and I work for VPP. I was curious along the lines of what James asked. I was curious, like to what extent does the deployment of clean energy rely on global trade, global resourcing? And then also, like, as someone who works in demand response, like, I don't get to work with, like, EVs or solar, but, like, I'm wondering what makes you very confident that we will sort of see that surplus of energy in the future, because that's ideally what I want.
There's a couple of questions there. One of the things I'd say, one of the most interesting things, literally tomorrow morning, I'm talking with a guy about global trade, about the relationship of global trade to clean energy, what this drive for reshoring means, like which flows are going where, what effects tariffs are going to have on all that. You know, because sort of like the impetus, the fad now, the thing, the sort of weird bipartisan push is for onshoring things with the notion that other people dominating your supply chains is a national security threat. And I find when people describe what the threat is, there's a lot of jazz hands. And I just like trying to squint through, like, but particularly like, if you're my top customer, I need you as much as you need me. You know what I mean? Like if I cut you off from my product, I'm just shooting myself in the foot. Like, so like, you know, China could cut off our graphite. Yes. But like, would they? When? Why? Like that would hurt them badly to do that. So like maybe in a situation of literal war or like on the verge of war, but just like, I want more about that than like, China, you know what I mean? With like, that seems to be what's driving half of domestic policy these days is China. Like, okay, I'll do whatever you're asking. You know what I mean? Like, so, and like in some, I hate to be cynical, in like some senses that's helped. Like that's probably what got IRA. It's probably what got IRA over the line. It wasn't that people got religion about climate. You know what I mean? It's like being scared of China. But on your other question, the VPP thing and like distributed energy and I think we don't even know yet the extent of this story, but like again, hyperscalers showing up, wanting lots and lots and lots of clean energy is like a giant push behind everything we're doing and want to do. And it's very important that force, which is huge and powerful, be managed and channeled in positive ways. Because again, you could see that going wrong. You could see like a bunch of gas plants popping up, which is what a lot of them want. But I think what they're gonna find is if you want lots of electricity quick, nuclear is slow, gas is slow, solar is less slow. You know what's the very fastest is the energy infrastructure that already is built, which is every residence and commercial building and industrial building in the country has capacity, spare capacity that it's not using, right? And that's all VPPs are. It's just like, let's use that capacity. If you want to get new electrons on the grid, there is no faster way to do that than by managing and coordinating distributed resources with software. And that is just the logic of the situation. Like, with so much money involved, there's going to be some clarity of vision. These people do not want to mess around. You know what I mean? So they're going to see that obvious truth. They're going to come to that obvious truth. You can see it happening in news releases. Like, they're all like, we're going to build SMRs, and then they like call somebody from the energy world. And the guy says, you see the faces like, oh, yeah. So like, they're going to get there. They're going to get there. But like, VPPs, basically like coordinating distributed energy, is the energy infrastructure that is there waiting to be deployed. So that's just like, in a sense, like, that's what I mean about being on the right side of history. Like, that is just the logic of the situation. And they're going to come to it. They are not going to give a damn about carbon emissions. They're just going to be, we need electricity
now.
Stat. And there it is. Like, that's where you can get it fast. Like, you can get it fastest from existing distributed infrastructure, next fastest from solar and wind, then gas, then, on up the line. So just the need for speed is on our side. It's working for us.
Great place to end the conversation. Thank you, David. This was very fun.
All right, well, that's a wrap on our first ever live show of Climate Papa. Thanks for tuning in. I always welcome feedback and thoughts. Just shoot me an email to ben@climatepapa.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please send it over to some friends that might like it. Those direct recommendations to friends and the group chats are always the most meaningful to us. All right, with that, as always, let's have the Balkan Bump remix of Mellow Kind of Hype by Slink and Lazy Surf Orchestra to take us out.
On we go like...